G'day guys and welcome to this business management lesson. In today's lesson we're looking at key knowledge point 333. That is unit 3, area of study 3 and the third key knowledge point for this area of study. Today specifically we're looking at the characteristics of operations management within both manufacturing and service businesses. Now I'll remind you that the key elements of an operations system refers to the three parts of any operations system. And that is inputs, processes, and outputs. The inputs are the components, the materials, the resources that your business needs to be able to do its core function. The outputs is whatever is produced by the core function, and typically that's what you sell to your customers. And the processes are whatever is involved in converting those inputs into your outputs. Now, one difference between the characteristics of manufacturing and service-based businesses might be from the inputs. If you consider the way that you might have music to entertain guests at a party, if you're going to use speakers, perhaps a Bluetooth speaker, to provide music at a party, well, the manufacturing for that Bluetooth speaker was probably very resource intensive. The inputs would have included microchips, cabling, diaphragms for the speakers, lithium-ion batteries, all manner of component parts that needed to be assembled. Whereas you might instead opt for a service-based approach to providing music at a party. You might hire a musician. If that's the case, then an individual is going to have to work quite hard to perform for a few hours, singing songs and entertaining your guests at that party. In this case, the inputs for that kind of business is going to be primarily dependent on human labor. So one of the differences between the characteristics of manufacturing and service-based businesses is that in manufacturing, the inputs are largely resource and capital intensive, whereas the inputs for a service-based business are more heavily dependent on human labor. We can look at the processes for manufacturing and service-based businesses, and there are differences here too. When we think about the manufacturing of any product, it is likely that there is very little to absolutely no customer involvement in the processing of that product. And this couldn't be more different for service-based businesses. For things like a haircut or a massage, these services cannot be provided if a customer isn't involved. If there's not a customer who wants to get their haircut or wants to receive a massage, the service can't be delivered at all. So one of the differences between manufacturing and service when we look at processes is that manufacturing, there's very little to no customer involvement in the production of the outputs, in the processing, and in the service business, a customer involvement is necessary. There's heavy customer involvement in the processes for a service business. When we look at outputs, for a manufacturing business, tangible goods are typically what's produced. Things like Nike shoes can be held in your hand. That's what tangible means. The opposite of tangible is intangible. And if you think about the education that you're receiving at school, if you think about the haircut itself or the massage, you can't hold a massage. You can't hold a haircut. You certainly can't hold an education. These services provide intangible outputs, whereas a car or a hot dog or a pair of shoes is tangible. You can hold those manufactured goods. This adds another characteristic we can consider, which is the storage or consumption of these outputs. Tangible goods from manufacturing can both be stored and consumed at a separate time from production. You can go to a restaurant and have them produce you some food, which then you can take away and you can eat later. You could go to a shop and purchase a pair of shoes, and you could take those home and put them in your wardrobe, and you may not wear them for days or weeks after you purchased it. This is not true of the outputs of a service-based business. But just as they have heavy customer involvement in the processing, these outputs cannot be stored. They're intangible, which means that you can't go to a hairdresser and buy a haircut and then just have it later. You're either receiving it at the time you pay for it or you're not receiving it at all. You can't keep a car wash in your back pocket. Your car was either washed at the car wash when you paid for the service or it wasn't. You can't buy a car wash to access at a later time. These outputs these intangible outputs must be consumed simultaneous with the production of that output, with the processing of that service. And because consumption and production are simultaneous, these outputs can't be stored. This also means that these outputs, manufacturing and service-based outputs, are quite different in whether or not they can be standardized. Standardization means that you can produce multiple outputs of identical standards. So when you're manufacturing, the possibility is there that you can mass produce a good. Certainly, if you look at the picture on your screen, you can see that there's racks and racks of suit jackets there. If a business is using machinery to produce these outputs, it can probably produce tens, if not hundreds, of identical copies of a product. That means that the outputs of a manufactured business can be more easily standardized. With a service-based business, it's almost impossible to standardize your output. It is impossible to mass produce a service. If consumption and production are simultaneous, then you would need a linear increase in the amount of resources that you have access to be able to produce the same quality of service, which is not mass production. That's just production. However, this provides some benefits. Where manufacturing is more easily standardized and mass produced, a service-based business which can't mass produce and standardize their outputs very easily is much more easily customized, which is why you might be able to buy a suit from, say, Maya just off the rack, and it might be a little bit cheaper. But if you go to a tailor to get a fitted suit, generally speaking, it's going to fit you better because it's been customized for your particular body dimensions. And typically, you'll pay a little bit more for that service because it tends to be a higher quality service that has been customized just for you. Now, in summary for this key knowledge point, I've included a number of differences between the characteristics of manufacturing and service-based businesses in this lesson. And a summary of the content included in this lesson is on your screen right now. What I haven't done is talked about the similarities. Now, these are pretty straightforward. The similarities of manufacturing and service-based businesses is they all have the same three key elements of their operation systems. They have inputs, they will have resources that they need, they have processes, they do convert those inputs into outputs, and they do have outputs. They do have something that they can sell to a customer. The differences are quite significant, and by no means is this an exhaustive list of all the possible differences you could write about in an assessment. So I do want you to perhaps try and broaden your horizons, access resources that might talk about things that I haven't included in this lesson, but do be aware that you can fall back on these anytime, and they should be reliable enough to carry you through. That's all for today. See you next time.